Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to The Plant Path. And I am excited to start a new series or category of posts that I'm going to be doing here called Anatomy of a Formula. And I am super excited about this. You know, there's one thing about herbal medicine that is probably one of my favorite aspects, and that is formulation. I just absolutely love the process of formulation. I love the unique synergy that emerges when we combine herbs together in intelligent and strategic ways. The specificity for the person that you're working with. It's just a lot of fun. I love formulation. And while I think it's really enjoyable and fun and fascinating and interesting to study, it's also one of the areas that I find in the more budding herbalist can be a little bit challenging. It can be a little confusing. It can be a little bit difficult to think through. And it can be an area where it can, you see a lot of folks kind of end up just throwing a bunch of herbs together in a bottle and hoping it'll work. And this is not something we generally want to do. We want to approach our formulation with a strategic kind of mindset to suit the person. Now, an interesting thing when we look at formulation in kind of comparing Eastern herbal medicine to Western herbal medicine is that in the Eastern traditions, notably here would be Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, is they have a very long-standing formulary, really. There's traditional formulas that are prepared in particular ways with certain ratios, certain augmentations, but there is a kind of a tradition of the formulas, right? Like specific formulas and combinations of herbs that have been used continuously for a really, really long time. In the West, for some reason, there doesn't really seem to be that, at least not as firmly anchored as we see in Eastern herbal medicine. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think one is the politics of Western herbalism and Western medicine in general has really, herbal medicine has gone through, these rises in popularity and then just getting like obliterated and suppressed and pushed into the periphery, especially with the advent of, modern allopathic medicine. We see, the Greek Galenic tradition being practiced throughout Europe for a very long time until Paracelsus comes along and revolutionizes the practice of medicine, as many other things were being revolutionized throughout the Renaissance. And then, coming over to North America, we see some distinct traditions emerging from that, from the root doctors and Thomsonianism, eventually coming into the physiomedicalists and the eclectics. And then all of that just kind of dissolved and fell apart in the early 1900s. And now, of course, in the 60s and up till now, we see this resurgence of herbal medicine again. So it's like kind of been this rocky situation in terms of Western herbal medicine, and not, it's like the tradition has constantly been changed, reworked, thrown away, suppressed, and eventually trying to be reinvigorated and reestablished, which I think is what's happening now. But when we consider in North America, at least, the pinnacle of North American herbalism was really during the 1800s and early 1900s, we do see a little bit of a tradition of formulation there, specifically with the physiomedicalists. Now, the physiomedicalists were doctors, right? These were, whatever university trained physicians, licensed practitioners, and they used a lot of herbs. And the physiomedicalists formulated a bit more than their counterpart, which was the eclectic school that used a lot of herbs, a lot of other medicines too. But the eclectics, while maybe some of them used some formulations, they were very simple, they were very small, but they tended to use more specifics, simple, single herbs. The physiomedicalists really emerged out of Thomsonianism, which was developed by Samuel Thompson, which was more of like Thompsonianism was more like a home country herbalism, people living on their homesteads and farms, and, they could follow Thompson's system to treat themselves. But there were practitioners of Thompsonianism that ultimately developed into physiomedicalism. But what we see in physiomedicalism is, a period of time where there was a number of herbs that were used in combination with one another that built over time, over the decades. And these combinations of herbs were used with consistency and in a way developed a bit of a North American formulation tradition. So what I want to talk about here in this lesson or discussion, I guess it's kind of a lesson, but whatever, podcast, whatever this is, talk about the foundations of a formula. So I was going to do our first anatomy of a formula. My goal in this series is to just break down formulas. Like I want to talk about simple combinations of herbs, break it down, talk about it, talk about the properties, talk about the actions, talk about the energetics, talk about the similarities, the overlaps, the differences, how they might come together to be used for specific situations going on, right, in someone's body. But I realized before I do that, it might be helpful to just talk a little bit about the foundations of formulas. So that's what I want to do here, specifically in the context of pairs and triplets. So, real quick, I just want to mention, actually, to backtrack real quick to the physiomedicalists. I would say a lot of those physiomedicalist practitioners that I will often be referencing here, and these aren't just physiomedicalists, there's some eclectics too, but think people like Samuel Thompson, Finley Ellingwood. I really like Ellingwood's Materia Medica. William Cook, T.M. Lyle, Priest and Priest, R. Swinburne Clymer, amongst others. But these were some of the pretty prolific authors that wrote some really great texts, and you can see a lot of them reference some of these simple formulas. Now, the problem with formulation that I see the most is the concept of the kitchen sink formula, right? Pick every herb good for the condition and throw it in a bottle along with the kitchen sink for good measure and hope it'll work. Or the shotgun formula, right? Just throw every antibacterial herb or every quote unquote antiviral herb into a bottle and hope it'll work. Hope's a good thing. I'm all about hope. It's kind of, for me, it's like a spiritual tenet of how to live a good life is to be a hopeful person. But when it comes to administering an herbal formula, we don't want to rely on hope alone. We want to know. You want to know that it's going to work. You want to have some confidence that that herb is going to work, that formula is going to work. And in that regard, that formula should be put together intelligently. Each herb should be selected for a very particular reason with a very particular intention. It should interact with the other herbs in the formula in a very specific way to achieve a very specific and intended outcome. We want our formulas to be designed to address the whole person, not just the symptoms or disease. And this is why generalized herbal formulas can be problematic in some instances because they're oftentimes not specific enough. To have a pre-made headache formula, it might help some people with some kinds of headaches, but it'll probably not help a majority of the other ones. And this is because there's lots of different kinds of headaches. Lots of different locations of headaches, lots of different reasons people have a headache, lots of different manifestations of a headache. So when it comes to formulation, I'm approaching this from a perspective of administering herbs to the whole person, not just to the symptom or to the disease, but to the person with that symptom or disease and their own unique expression of it. Because you can have 5 different people with headaches, and different herbs and combinations of herbs are going to be effective for different people. And in one person, it might work great. In another person, it might do nothing. In another person, it might make it worse, right? Because this person might have a hot explosive, excessive type headache. This person might have a cold deficiency type headache. This person might have an excess of tension. This person, it might be up here. This person, it might be back here. There's just a lot of different ways that it can manifest. And so I think that's the basis of holistic herbal medicine, is that we want to be person specific and not general to the disease. As I've said, I think formulation is an incredible way to study herbs. Either moving forward with a plant, so you start with the plant and you think of what other herbs would combine well with it, which is a great way to branch off and study some other related herbs to it, or in reverse, where you find an interesting formula and you break that formula down into its composition and study those individual herbs. Either way, formulation is an incredible tool for studying materia medica. And that is a big part of one thing that I do in my monographs that I publish in our subscription program, Materia Medica Monthly, where you get monthly amazing in-depth content digging into plants, their properties, their principles, holistic herbal medicine, and lots more. So be sure to click the link in the description to head on over. Check out Materia Medica Monthly. You can get started at a low monthly price. You also get access to me with live classes and webinars every other month, where you get to ask me your questions and get support on your plant path. So with that, let's get back to talking about pairs and triplets. So what is the basis of an herbal formula? Well, I would say the simple foundation of an herbal formula is putting one herb with another herb, and that creates the pair. So the herbal pairing is really powerful. A lot of times when people think of formulas, they think of these big lists of herbs and combining, dozens of herbs together, or they've got to be this big, huge, complicated thing. I think let's simplify it and look at the profundity of simply the act of combining an herb with another herb. It can be an incredibly powerful thing that happens, especially when you consider the full spectrum of qualities that a single herb can possess, and the full spectrum of qualities that another herb can possess, and then you put them together, and it's like, whoa, that's doing a whole bunch more. That is very, very powerful. And I always like to say that herbal formulation, I think, especially just thinking in terms of a pair, is a really good example of the concept of the whole being greater than the sum total of the parts. Like with herbal formulations, 1 + 1 is not 2, right? 1 + 1 can be 5 or 10, depending on the combination. That it's not, you can't just say taking ginger and gentian is just ginger plus gentian. It's there's a synergy that happens that creates a totally different result than either of those herbs do on their own in isolation. And the way of thinking it is it's much greater than just adding them together in a mathematical way in your mind. The whole is greater than the sum total of the parts. Because something new is created, that you're creating a unique, distinct entity when you combine one herb with another herb that is indeed very, very powerful. And, really, and even taking it a step back even further, looking at the single plant. The single plant, in some instances, could be seen as a formula unto itself. If you think of, say you need someone, say there's someone that's, they've got some gas and bloating, and they've got, and they're nervous and anxious. And you say you want to support their digestion with a bitter tonic, and you want a carminative and you want a nervine, something to calm them down. Well, you could pick, a carminative like ginger, and you could pick a bitter tonic like Oregon grape root or dandelion root or gentian, and you could put a nervine in there like, say, blue vervain or hops or something like that. And there you would have a nervine, a bitter tonic, and a carminative. Simple three herb formula. Or you could use chamomile, right? Chamomile is all of those things, right? If you make it strong enough, it can be bitter. It's certainly aromatic and carminative, and it's a very reliable nervine. So chamomile is like a formula unto itself. And this is a mindset that I think is a really powerful kind of perceptual shift of a medicinal plant. Like, think of each plant like a formula unto itself. So if you're working with a person and you determine, okay, they need, say, all of these herbal actions, or they need to address all of these organ affinities and systems and tissues of the body. Well, rather than just thinking, okay, what herb does that, and what herb does this, and what herb does that, and what herb does that, contemplate, is there an herb that does all of that? And if there is, we would say that is a specifically indicated remedy, right? That remedy is really kind of checking all the boxes of what that person needs. Now, of course, people are very complex. It's not always the case that you can find a single remedy that really matches the total global pattern of that person. You got to know your remedies really, really well to be able to pattern match on that level. This is ultimately what the homeopaths do and what the simplers do, single herb practitioners do. You got to really know your stuff to be able to do that effectively. Most of us tend to formulate for that reason, because we don't always know what herb matches the whole pattern, or nor can identify it, and end up combining herbs together to address the whole person. But it all begins with the pair. From that pair, we get a triplet. And I like to think of the potency of the single herb as a formula unto itself. You have two herbs that are formulas unto themselves. You combine them to create a pair. That's the dynamic duo. And then you add a third herb to that. There's a lot going on there, okay? There's a lot going on with a simple 3 herb combination. And I mention this because a lot of people think herbal formulas have to be these big, complicated things. And in a lot of instances, if you pick the right plants, 3 herbs can be incredibly powerful. Now, these are what I like to think of as the kind of the foundations of a formula, right? Pairs and triplets. And this is a common concept of formulation in traditional Chinese medicine, as well as in Ayurveda. And I think it's something that we can apply to the practice of Western herbalism as well. And I just want to give credit where credit's due. This is stuff that I learned from one of my herbalists that I really look up to and revere, and has been a great teacher of me over the years, and that would be Paul Bergner, founder of the North American Institute of Medical Herbalism. And Paul talks a lot about this concept of pairs and triplets. And when I learned this, it was like, whoa, of course. It was one of those things where it was like, duh, why didn't I think of that? Of course, the foundation of a formula is a pair and a triplet, but there's a mindset there that really changes how you approach it. And it also changes your approach of how you study herbs. Because when I'm studying an herb and learning about that herb's properties, I start thinking about, what herbs would I pair with this herb for a certain intended result? Like, what would be just one other herb that I would combine with this herb for a particular result? And I think that's a really great way to study herbs, learn the herbs, and branch off to studying other herbs. So anatomy of a formula. So yes, when studying an herb, a highly useful strategy is to study other remedies that would pair nicely with it. Or when studying herbal formulas, It's helpful to break the formula down to see everything that it's doing. And that's what I call the anatomy of a formula. When I used to work in the supplement industry, I used to walk around when it would be slow and there wasn't anyone to consult. I would just walk around and I would just read everyone's formulas, right? And I had my little book and I would, just take notes. Oh, this is their nerve formula and it has these herbs in it. And oh, interesting, this one's warm, 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 cold, cold, cold. Oh, interesting. They kind of thought about the temperature energetics or maybe they didn't and it was a mistake. But I would be really breaking down the formulas. I would study the formulas by breaking them down into their constituent parts. And I would start seeing a lot of themes like, oh, wow, interesting. Like it's not uncommon to see hops, valerian, and skullcap in formulas together. Isn't that, or hops, not hops, valerian, hops, valerian, passion flower. Very common triplet in a lot of, insomnia formulas, nervine formulas, etc. And I saw, oh, well, valerian's hot and hops is cold and passion flower's like pretty neutral, right? Oh, that's a pretty nicely temperature balanced nervine triplet, right? So how do we do that? Like, how do we break down a formula? Well, it's like everything that I teach. For those of you who follow me for a while, you're probably so tired of hearing me say this, but it is the fundamental properties of the herb: taste, affinities, actions, and energetics. So I just break that down for each herb in the formula. What's the taste of the herb? What are its affinities? What are its actions? What's its energetics? And you break that down and you start to get a sense for what each herb is doing. So what I do when I'm breaking down the anatomy of a formula, I take each individual herb and list out those 4 properties of each, okay? And I kind of do them all side by side with each other. And again, this is how you can observe how a single herb is like a formula unto itself. Or as I like to think of the herb, each individual herb is pre-formulated by nature, right? So what we can do there, though, is start to see, okay, all of these herbs, what do all of those herbs have in common? Okay, how do they overlap? How are they similar? So we could do that in, oh, they're all targeting the nervous system, or oh, they're all nervine hypnotics, or they're all warming, or they're all cooling, right? So you're looking at where are their overlaps. Then you also want to look at their differences. Okay, these ones are, this is common in like an alterative formula. Oh, these are more digestive alteratives. And oh, here we've got more liver bitter based alteratives. And here we have lymphagogue alteratives. And here we've got some diuretic alteratives. They're united in that they're all alterative, but they're different in the organ system that they're targeting, which is lending to a full global channels of elimination, opening, detoxifying, alterative formula. And so the areas of overlap are those properties exemplified through their combination. Okay, so the fact that passion flower, hops, and valerian are all nervine, that nervine quality is exemplified, and the combination of those 3 herbs is going to be significantly more nervine, relaxant, or hypnotic than any of those herbs individually. The areas of difference are how the net effect is broadened, or its scope is widened, and how the formula will do more in a broader sense than each herb on its own. So that's the way I think of it. It's like the similarities are the targeted effect, like strength, like doing this thing stronger. And the differences are, oh, but we're also going to cover a little bit of this, a little bit of this, and a little bit of this, and a little bit of this to support the primary goal of that formula. So again, we create something greater than the sum total of the parts. So I want to talk about some basic formulation concepts for pairing that I think are good to consider. These are the whys behind combining one herb with another. So the first is what I call sympathetic properties. So this would be combining an herb with a similar action to further pronounce that property in the first herb. So we're just talking about pairing, right? We're talking about pairing and triplets, basically. So similar herbs, putting them together to bring out that property more. So an example of this would be, say, combining Simicifuga racemosa or black cohosh with Viburnum opulus and cramp bark. Both are spasmolytic. We combine them and we're going to get a stronger spasmolytic quality than we would get from either herb alone. And we could consider why is that? Well, black cohosh is going to be spasmolytic for different reasons that cramp bark is spasmolytic, right? They might achieve the same end result of relaxing musculoskeletal cramping and tension and spasm, but they're perhaps doing it through very different, for example, constituents, right? So that's a sympathetic property. So I think of the properties in the two herbs are doing a similar thing. Second would be synergistic properties. So this would be combining herb 2 with herb 1, whereas herb 2 has a different property, but a supportive property to the first to achieve the ultimate desired effect. So I gave the example of the alternative. So for example, we could combine burdock root with nettle leaf to broaden its alterative effect. And this would be a difference in affinity. Sure, both have overlap in that they're alterative, but burdock root is going to be more of a hepatic liver alterative, whereas nettle leaf is more of a kidney diuretic, blood cleansing, yet also nutritive alterative. So burdock is synergizing. There's a synergy where they on the one hand, they do a similar thing, but they go about it in a very different way. So it's synergistic. This is also, we could also argue that this is a sympathetic property, but they're supporting different areas of the body. So if we were to just give burdock alone, that's going to help with some hepatic detoxification. But by adding a diuretic, a different property, a diuretic is going to help to whatever the liver is maybe dredging out or making things water soluble, the nettle leaf is going to help flush those out of the kidney. So it's synergizing. Another great classic example of this would be combining a carminative herb with a bitter herb to support digestion. So a great example of this would be like putting fennel seed with artichoke leaf. Artichoke's very bitter. Fennel is very nice and aromatic and carminative. And so those two together are going to ultimately support digestion, but they're going to do it in a very different way, two very different actions. That tends to be the way I think of it, as different actions or different affinities. Whereas the sympathetic effect is they have the same action. They might go about it biochemically a little differently, but the action in and of itself is different. With synergy, you have two different actions, right? A bitter and a carminative, but they both lead to the ultimate end result of supporting digestion. And the third property that I like to think of is harmonizing properties. So this would be more looking at it. So I think of synergy and sympathy as more looking at organ affinities and actions. That tends to be the way that I think of it. Synergistic properties are going to be things that support the ultimate end result. Harmonizing property is more looking at the energetics or the humoral properties to balance. This can also be if you're using stronger herbs, even low dose herbs. This can be adding herbs to temper or even full out negate potential aggravations. For example, giving, adding, if there's an herb that's really, really bitter and can maybe be a little nauseating if you take too much of it, you could put a little bit of ginger in there to alleviate any potential nausea that might be brought about by that herb, like if you're using, say, poke root. Another way is to temper the energetics. And a really common way to do this is through moistening herbs. So adding, because a lot of herbs tend to be drying. Now, if you want to use a whole bunch of herbs, but the client is dry, this is something that's really important to be aware of. So we add a harmonizer, such as licorice. This is why licorice is considered, the great harmonizer. This is why it's very commonly used in Chinese medicine. I hear a lot of people argue that licorice's harmonizing effect is because it tastes good. Maybe that's a part of it. I mean, certainly I think licorice does taste nice. A lot of people don't mind the flavor of licorice, and it does tend to improve the flavor of formulas, which we could say harmonizes the formula because it's going to increase compliance. I think it's much deeper though. I think licorice is doing, I think one of the main ways it harmonizes the formula is tempering a humoral drying effect by adding a bit of moisture there. Now, you can do this with a lot of other herbs. It doesn't have to be licorice. But a really great example of this would be a really great respiratory combination is Osha with licorice, or Ligusticum porteri, or here in the Northwest, I use Ligusticum grayi, but they're essentially the same with licorice. So Osha tends to be pretty hot, pungent, irritating, drying. Say you want to give that herb, but the cough can tend to be on the dry side. You put a little licorice in there, balance that out. I also use licorice with turmeric quite a bit because turmeric, being bitter and aromatic, can be quite drying. And it synergizes with the inflammation modulating property of turmeric very nicely as well. So these are kind of the three main aspects of a formulation strategy, foundations of formula. So I say foundations of formula is pairing and tripleting, and these form the modules. So once you know good pairs, like you've got pairs of herbs that do a certain thing that you really like, well, you can start stacking pairs or triplets together to create more complex formulas. And this is a really cool way of formulating. If you think in terms of pairs and triplets, if you think in terms of modules or groupings of herbs, this can be a really fun, dynamic way to formulate. And then the reasoning behind combining herbs would be through either harmonizing properties, synergizing properties, or sympathetic properties, or kind of what we might say is enhancing properties through having a similar effect. So there's a lot more that could be gone into on all of this, right? I mean, in my Vitalist Herbal Practitioner program, we do like a full module on formulation for like 8 hours. Just so much that could be talked about this, but this hopefully can be a useful way to get your gears turning, thinking about the concept of formulation. I am really, really excited to be getting into this series in more depth and detail, and talking about we'll probably start off just talking about some classic pairs, maybe triplets used in Western herbalism. I'm sure I'll post to this series every now and then, maybe every other month or so, depending on just how our content calendar is looking. But this is something that over the years, I want to build up because I'm excited about it. I think it's fun. I think it's a great way for you all to learn herbs and hopefully incorporate some traditional pairs and triplets into your therapeutic approaches. So again, this discussion just giving some context for future posts that I'll do every now and then. I hope it serves you well in your studies of Materia Medica. And thanks so much for tuning into this episode of The Plant Path. I truly appreciate it. Be sure to post a comment, like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. That really does help support the channel more than you might know. Appreciate you making it to the end. That also, believe it or not, really does help support the channel too. So thanks again so much for being part of the Evolutionary Herbalism community. Until the next one, take care and be well.